why do I think it is interesting for you guys to learn statistics as your core math? Well, for me, it's a simple explanation, and it has to do with how I think we should look at the world. I think that when we make decisions, we try to do it in a way that is rational, that is evidence-based, that is not a mistake. So, when we make decisions, a lot of times we base it off of what we think that decision is the right thing to do. So at the end of a long day, when we go home, sometimes, perhaps you, and I know I do, ask myself, should tonight be a drinking night? Anybody maybe vaguely experienced that? I'm seeing a couple smiles and a hesitant, there we go. Remember, lock the elbow if you're raising that hand. You have that feeling, you're just like, maybe I should drink tonight. Well, should I drink? One of the things that I like to do is I like to collect these headlines. There's no comm people in here, so I'm going to make fun of comm and journalism. These journalistic attempts to be scientific, where they tell you what the result from a study is. Right? So study shows how red wine compound slows aging. So if you want to live forever, drink a ton of red wine, right? That's the lesson from that headline. So maybe tonight, I should be like, today was a rough day. It took three years off my life. I should drink to live longer. That'll work. Or you could be in a situation where I actually had this happen to me. A doctor prescribed drinking for heart health. He wanted me to drink a glass of red wine with dinner. I don't like red wine. It tastes like sticks. Actually, I take that back. It tastes like warm sticks, because red wine's the one you're not supposed to refrigerate. It tastes awful. I don't understand how people have a drinking problem with red wine. But, you know, heart health, red wine, because it makes you live forever. Well, actually, some studies have shown that no, it doesn't. There's really no proof. There's an idea, but there's really no proof out there. So, generally speaking, I think that this understanding statistics and being literate in statistics should help us not only to make decisions, but also to understand the world. We're living in a very interesting time right now where people are actually debating whether or not facts are true or not. Like, I'm not going political on you guys, but we're actually having this public debate over whether or not things we know we actually know or not. Here's an example. When they were confirming Rick Perry to be Energy Secretary, Perry talked about how with climate change, there should be a red team exercise. And that's where you get a bunch of skeptics together and you have them raise all of the objections to, like, for example, whether or not climate change is a thing. And then you go back and forth with another team, and the team responds to those, and then this red team exercise goes back and forth essentially until they're satisfied and they agree with the other team. And a senator said, I don't know if you're aware of this or not, Governor Perry, but we've already done that. It's called science. It's called the scientific process. It's called peer review. And so when we as academics publish a study, it has to go through what they would call a red team process. It goes out for review, people criticize it, you respond to the reviewers, known as a revise and resubmit, and then you keep doing that until the critics are satisfied. But they don't think that's actually what it is, because they don't call it a red team. Like, come on. We shouldn't have to explain these things. So, for me, this idea of understanding statistics should lead to us making better decisions. And you do this without necessarily consciously try to do it. So let's think about a purchase. We got an economics person in here. Let's say we're going to buy a car. Everybody, we need a new car. what are the things you're going to look at when selecting a car? Miles per gallon? Why? Yeah, right? So if you drive a car like my car that gets 15 miles per gallon, you're going to fill up more than if you drive a car that gets, anybody in here got a car that's really good on gas? Somebody in the last class had 40 miles. 32? 25? 37? What do you drive? I'm not driving a Kia. I drive a Chevy Traverse. Yep. It's about what you're supposed to get. Yep. Well, it's because I'm driving a truck that has an SUV body on it. Weighs 5,000 pounds. Okay? So gas mileage. You would consider gas mileage. Miles per gallon. You know what that is? That's a statistic. That's data that you can collect on all sorts of cars. What else do you consider? No, you don't. Because you're going to drive that thing into the ground. You're going to own it forever.
Cost to fix the issues that
Cost of maintenance. Somebody's dad has Popular Mechanics. All right? No. Come on, what else do you think about when you're going to buy a car?
price point.
Yeah, the price. How much is this going to cost me? Well, that's a budgeting issue, right? That's where you're actually taking into account the cost. And this is where we get into economics, right? What utility am I going to derive from this object for the cost? And you have to weigh the cost that you would spend on that and the impact it would have on your budget and your ability to purchase other things like, you know, housing and food and clothes. All right, what else we got? Safety. Which is the safest car out there? Brand of car, not actual physical car. No. No. Buicks are just Chevys. Well, it's technically owned by some Asian folks, but they're Northern European. No. No, they're not European. Come on, safest car out there. No, Volvos. The boxy station wagons. Oh, they are not only making them. Volvo has a something called Volvo 2020. It's like Volvo Vision 2020 or something 2020. And the goal is that by 2020, Volvo wants to build a car that you can't get killed in. That should survive like any accident. Typical accident, not like driving your car off a cliff accident, but like, you know, T-boned or, you know, running up under a truck or something. Like one of those accidents. That's their goal. So maybe you take safety into account. Well, how do we know whether or not a car is safe? How do we test it? We crash a bunch of cars. And we crash them all under the same conditions. We use the scientific method to go, would you die if you crashed in this car versus would you die if you crashed in that car? How do we know? Crash all the cars the same way and see how the crash test dummies do. All right. So really what we're doing is we're living under a world where we want to have an idea. We want to know. We want to understand fact. We want to understand, and this is where the debate comes in, the difference between fact and truth. Because truth as a term isn't good for science. And the problem with that idea of truth is that you allow it to come from more than one source. So where can truth come from? Well, it can come from personal investment. Back there. You see your hat. I don't know what that is.
Coastal hat.
All right. That's the best I can do. All right. Oh, there it is. Okay. He's wearing a hat for the Coastal Baseball Championship. Okay. Who's the greatest quarterback of all time? Unfortunately, see, the way he phrased that was good. Unfortunately, Tom Brady. Why do you say unfortunately Tom Brady? Why do you say Tom Brady?
Statistics.
What statistic is the most important one? Right, he's won not world championship. He's won 5 Super Bowl titles. So that makes him the best quarterback of all time.
It's a team event, obviously.
There we go. Okay. Maybe it's a team event. So maybe Peyton Manning's the best quarterback of all time. And if he just had Tom Brady's team around him, he would have won like 10 rings. There we go. When we have fandom, that gives us our truths. And that's a form of investment. So I'm not going to say the word bias, but it's an inclination towards making decisions based upon what you're invested in. And that for you can be a source of truth. Authority can also be a source of truth. I love this one because it's what I use on my kids every day. Why is something true? Because I said so. Right? And that's all you need to know. Because I don't have time to explain it to you. Because, John, it's time to leave the house. We got to go, buddy. All right? Why do we wear blue shoes when we have blue shorts on? Because I said so. I don't need to go into whole matching and color things. No, just put the shoes on and let's get in the car. Right? Why do I have to buckle up? This is when I go back to force equals mass times acceleration, but I don't have time to explain physics to you, John, because I said so. Or, even better, because the police say so, and Daddy doesn't want to go to jail. That's another thing as a parent you never really imagine saying so much, but I say it all the time. Why did we do this? Because Daddy doesn't want to go to jail. Right? Abigail at the baseball game. Daddy, why can't I have a drink of your beer? Because Daddy doesn't want to go to jail. Right? Why do I have to wear a seatbelt? Because I don't want to go to jail. Why don't we drive around those cars that are stopped? Because Daddy doesn't want to go to jail. Been pulled over for that one. All right? So authority is a great source of truth. Why don't we do things? Because you're not supposed to do them. Logic, or what we consider to be logic, is a source of truth. You can go take Philosophy 110 if you want. You can learn how we think reasoning could get us to truth. Faith sometimes is a source of truth, even though we shouldn't actually do this. I like infographics. I like it when you create like art and maps and stuff out of data. This floated around Facebook this summer. Has anybody seen this before? Any guesses as to what the, red little arcs are? No, because you've never seen this before, and you have no clue. Somebody mapped the Bible. Because the Bible actually includes a lot of references to itself within the Bible, or it takes information and restates it later on. These red lines, from beginning to end, map out all of the contradictions in the Bible. So if earlier in the book it says, children are great, you should have lots of them. And at the end of the book it says, you should confess your sins for having children. That's a contradiction. Because earlier in the Bible it said it's a good thing, and at the end of the Bible it says it's a sin. Or even some things like they don't even know what mountain Moses went on. There's actually a contradiction in the Bible as to what mountain he went on. Town names, who's married to who had which kid. So these are all contradictions in the Bible. But if you have faith, well, maybe you can just, names change. Use some logic. Combine faith with investment and say, these don't really matter. All right. And last but not least, we have science. But even then, with science, this concept of truth is elusive because, as I showed you with my red wine problem, science can tell us different things. It can tell us that I'll live forever, but my heart won't get any better. So that's why when we're doing social science, we try to stay away from terms that are absolute, like truth. And I can only imagine if we tried to live our lives by like headlines in the news. Like I said, I like to collect these things. Male jurors more likely to find overweight women guilty. So if you ever find yourself accused of murder, ladies, hit the gym. Pick up an eating disorder. You might increase your chances of being acquitted. Harvard study, because you know it's more important when it's a Harvard study. Gun control is counterproductive. Huh? And my last one is my favorite one. Friends with benefits have safer sex, study finds. Just think about that for a second. Friends with benefits have safer sex. Yes, because you're having sex with a person that you don't want to actually be in a relationship with, and you're not going to get trapped in having a baby with that person. But, you know, study finds. It's hard being a social scientist. The other difficulty with being a social scientist is that you have to make sure that you are separating fact from values. Now, what do I mean by values? What is a value? Give me an example of one or something.
Like, you think that that people shouldn't drink because it's bad for them.
Okay, you shouldn't drink because it's bad for you. That could be a value. All right, that's a whole value behind the temperance movement in the United States. It's a belief. What kind of bad stuff will you do when you get drunk? Make babies. There's that. Drive. Why is driving bad? Why?
Might crash into.
Yeah, because you were driving a 5,000-pound SUV around, and you're not exactly paying attention or have any fine motor skills, which is something you need when you're driving around a 5,000-pound SUV. Okay? Any other bad decisions you can make when you're drunk? Yeah, you could be totally out of your mind and decide that that person looked at you funny and they need a punch in the face, because that'll make you feel better. If you don't think I'm, that's what got Draymond Green in trouble last summer when he punched a Michigan State defensive back in the face. Dre got into a little trouble back at East Lansing. That's a value, right? That's a belief. But if you were trying to actually convince society, hey, we should ban alcohol, why? Well, because God said so. I don't know about that. There's a lot of contradictions in the Bible. Give me another reason why we should ban alcohol.
Statistics show that it can drastically reduce the amount of motor accidents at night if we ban it.
Okay, so we'll be safer as a society if we don't have alcohol. It's actually kind of true. The bad thing about the temperance movement and abolition was that people didn't understand why we did it. Public health improved under Prohibition. So dying of things like liver failure actually went down. The type of alcohol consumption changed, but it didn't actually, beer wasn't that hard to get, And there are some ways in which, you can still, it's in some cultures to just go ahead and do distilleries and, their own sort of things, whether it's fermentation or distillery. But the easy access, and what really was the thing with Prohibition, wasn't the access to alcohol, it was the social acceptance of it, like doing it everywhere or anywhere. So if you reduce the expectation that everybody drinks, you actually will get healthier. And so some of the public health things like liver failure, they actually saw a decrease. Now the problem was it created a black market, and then we had a rise in crime because of it, according to Hollywood movies. Okay. And of course, freedom. Let's not forget freedom. All right. So what we have to do is separate the facts from the values, right? And the way to do that for us is we're going to focus on two things. You okay? Okay. One, we're going to be empirically based. So instead of being based on value or belief, we're going to focus on observed evidence. Okay. What is it that we can measure? What is it that we can see? What is it that we can record? That's what we're going to focus on. Observed evidence. There was a political scientist by the name of Courtney Brown. Actually, he still is a political scientist. He's at Emory. And Courtney Brown should be known as the person who saw the alien spaceship in the Hale-Bopp comet. You guys are too young to know this story. But there was a cult in San Diego known as Heaven's Gate. And there was a creepy bald guy, and they all wore tracksuits. And there was a comet up in space. And when the arrival of the comet, that's when the cult decided that it was time for everybody to die. So they poisoned their pudding. They put on their tracksuits, and they went to bed in their little compound, and like 30 people died. And the reason that they killed themselves is because they were a cult that thought there was a spaceship of aliens that were coming to get them. And Courtney Brown is the guy that said the spaceship was being hidden by the Hale-Bopp comet. How did Courtney Brown know this? Courtney Brown has the ability to do remote viewing, which if you watch Game of Thrones is kind of like what the three-eyed raven Bran can do. Right? You close your eyes and you can see anything else in the world at the time. Wow, I just made that connection. That's kind of creepy. All right. So Courtney Brown claims that he can go back and see the times of Jesus, which would be a really cool thing because there's a lot of discussion of really what happened back then.
This guy's a job at university.
Yes. He's actually a decent political scientist before he came out and revealed that his remote viewing thing. Now, you too can also do remote viewing if you pay Courtney Brown to teach you how to do it. Let's just say when I visited Emory, they didn't let us know that he was around. Like, he's got tenure, he does what he needs to do. I think he teaches one class. He can't get anything published because if you publish something by Courtney Brown, you're publishing the remote viewing guy that incidentally killed a bunch of people in the Heaven's Gate cult, but his career is over, except for the fact that he collects a paycheck. When I was at Michigan State, we had a professor that wrote a brutal article, like parodying him, and it got published, and Paul never should have done that, but it was just cruel. So let's just say you cannot write in your paper that you remote viewed something, and that's your evidence. Because if you're the only one that can do that, that's not evidence. If you're the only one that can see it, it doesn't count. You also need to arrive at your conclusions following a scientific method. And now that I just said those words out loud, somebody in here had a flashback to like high school and setting somebody on fire. Did you guys have an accident in a lab? The scarring will go away eventually. I knew it. Every class, there's always one. There's always one kid that did something that everybody will remember. Yep. Always. All right. I hate to burst your bubble, but what you all did in high school wasn't really following the scientific method. It was, hey, here's a dead cat. Cut it open and see what you find. Or a fetal pig or an earthworm. Okay? When you were in chemistry and you were given 2 clear liquids and told to make them purple by doing a titration, that's not actually the scientific method either. Thinking back at it, nothing I did in my 4 years of high school science could ever be described as following the scientific method. It was, here's a neat trick. Why don't you watch this for a second? Yeah. Because the scientific method for us, we're open, but we're skeptical. So if you have a claim, we're open to it, but we're going to say we need to verify it. And it revolves around a universal process or a universal set of methods. And what I want to do for the rest of the class is just sort of walk through those steps. On fire? Oof. Okay. I'm trying to think. We had a minor concussive event. Somebody poured too much of something in another and there was a loud poof. Boom, perhaps. But oh, she was, yeah. It wasn't until college till I actually set a guy on fire. All right. I just want to throw one little quirk into this, and this is mostly to describe sort of our political science issues with the scientific process. Is that a lot of times when you do social science research, you're adding something into it that makes it harder to convince other people. Remember back to the eclipse, and like physicists can show you the computer models and the equations that they use to predict where the sun actually will be and the moon will be, and like if we have that flashback to 2 weeks ago, like we totally believed all those nerds because they had the science. But when you add something about society, you add an element of politics to it that makes it a little bit more difficult to convince people. Politics especially because it's viewed as zero-sum. And zero-sum is a great college term to learn because it means if somebody gains, somebody else has to lose. Because when you add them together, they equal zero-sum. Budgets tend to be zero-sum. In order for my department to get more money, history has to get less money because there's just a set amount of money. Rights are also viewed as zero-sum. So if we extend rights to one group, another group may feel like they have less rights. My friend Jeremy and I are in this epic argument about whether or not a baker needs to provide a cake for a same-sex wedding. And it's going on 2 years now. And we're waiting for the court case to come out so that we can end this argument. But his argument is that the baker shouldn't have to sell a cake to a same-sex couple because of that baker's faith. And my response is the baker's not being asked to kiss anybody of the same sex or do anything. They just need to bake a cake, which is what they're offering to, conceivably, other people in the world. And they should be driven by capitalism and they should take the money for the cake. And I said, protecting one person's right to be treated equally is more important than, and this is where I lost him, than whether or not you feel comfortable by baking a cake. And if you have problems baking cakes, you shouldn't bake cakes, or at least you shouldn't get a license to bake cakes. Because there's a sort of assumption that government is for everybody. And he keeps coming back to me with, well, then you're telling me how to practice my faith. I'm not. Because we're not baking cakes in the church on Sunday. We're not in your confessional. We're not rewriting your book of scripture. We're just saying that what you do to earn money, you shouldn't discriminate against. And that's when I hit him with, is it okay not to sell black people cakes? Oh, well, that's different. It's like, aha, I gotcha. But what if it's your faith that says you're not allowed to sell black people cakes? Well, then, and then this is where we're stuck.
If it's a heterosexual baker, heterosexual person comes into the bakery, do they have to sell that person a cake?
Yes, if they sell people cakes, I don't think they should discriminate based upon who is receiving the cake. Not. See, they can, or if I don't have the ingredients, or I'm sorry, sir, I can't sell you a Twinkie, you should go buy a Twinkie at the grocery store. But if they sell cakes, and they're open to selling cakes, and they want to sell cakes, and they advertise we're selling cakes, and they sell a cake to an opposite sex couple, I don't think they should not sell a cake to a same-sex couple, because they don't like the same sex. Unfortunately, we live in a society that embraces government. And if we didn't, then I would drive my car wherever the hell I wanted to because it's got truck tires on it and the sidewalks are nice and flat. So if you want the safety of being able to not get run over by me on the sidewalk, you got to capitulate a little bit. And that's why you sell the damn cake.
Is the cake feeding into their wedding?
No, it's feeding people.
But it's not part of the ceremony?
Have you been to a wedding?
Yeah, cake cutting.
Is that part of the ceremony?
Well, I mean, not the official ceremony.
Does the priest bless the cake? Does the priest do
No,
anything?
but I mean, it's part of the celebration.
And in fact, I hate to tell you this, but the whole wedding ceremony thing isn't actually legal. Like, you don't need the ceremony. You know what you need in the state of South Carolina? A signature. That's all you need for a wedding. And I'm sorry, but if you selling somebody a cake makes you feel like you're engaging in same-sex sex, then you're making your cakes wrong. Or having sex wrong, one or the other. Like, you're still straight, you've made a cake, you're still straight. This is why he and I are good friends, we're co-authors, we'd love to go back and forth on this. But it's because of, again, this idea that rights are zero-sum. That for some group to gain, somebody else has to lose. Last one.
It's a question.
Okay.
So why does it matter necessarily your sexuality? Why can't you just order a cake? Why do you have to make it known?
You have to make it known. Why do you have to not make it known?
No, I'm just saying, like, why do you feel, not you, but why would
I show up and I say, here's the cake topper. It's got 2 dudes on it. Mm-hmm.
You could also put that on a picture.
Yes, I could. Could I not be male? Could I not be black? Could I not be... Exactly. And neither is being gay or straight. Just like whether or not I like broccoli is not a choice. Either it tastes good or it doesn't taste good. Either I want to have sex with men or I want to have sex with women. And if you don't believe me, go... No, I'm not going to go there. We can talk about that after class. Go try having the opposite type of sex that you want to have, and let me know if you liked it. All right. Zero sum. We all are now well versed on the concept of being zero sum, and now I want cake for some reason. All right, but not broccoli. This leads me to my final point. The difference between empirical and normative questions, because in one of your questions you said, should the government, right? Yeah, nod your head. Should the government be able to do that? That's a normative question. That's a question on preference, where value comes back into it. An empirical question is more of our does, right? Does something lead to something else? A normative question is, should something lead to something else? And this is where opinion and preference come in. And opinion and preference don't have any place in social science. It really doesn't. Okay. So if you slip and you start writing and you hit that word should, time out. You're asking the wrong kind of question. Does is a better question. Okay. So first step. The first thing we need to do, and again, don't copy all this stuff down. It's mostly for me. It's all in your book. It's where I got the information from. You've got the slides. Don't be slide copiers. First step, you develop a research hypothesis. Now, a hypothesis, again, is something you were probably taught in high school, and it's the idea where you're questioning whether or not one variable or one thing or one object or one stuff influences another thing, object, stuff, outcome. Okay? A statement regarding an expected or predicted relationship between variables. So let's think about this in terms of drunk driving again. Drunk driving is bad because you could wreck and kill somebody yourself. What assumption or what hypothesis is behind that statement? That as you are more drunk, you are what? More dangerous. Okay. Anybody else? As my drinking increases, my driving skills decrease. I like directional hypotheses. Okay? So a hypothesis is a statement regarding an expected or predicted relationship between variables. As your drinking increases, your probability of wreck increases, your driving skills decrease. That's a testable hypothesis. How do we do that? How could we test that? Has anybody done the simulator on Prince Lawn? They do a drunk driving simulator where I believe they actually use beer goggles. It's a real thing. Basically, if we impair your vision, that's to simulate drunkenness. How well do you do in a driving simulator? The answer is really bad. And what they do is they time you around a course and they see how long it takes you to wreck your virtual car with your beer goggles on. That's a way that we can test that hypothesis. Or we could actually get you really loaded and put you in a real car and drive you around a track and see what happens. And we got to film it because, you know, you can make a TV show out of it. They did. It's called Mythbusters, if you've ever seen that TV show. There we go. All right. What's a variable? What's our object, thing, stuff? It's a concept. It's what we're measuring, property, characteristic. But one of the key things about a variable is that it has to be variable. You have to be able to have different values. Okay. So test anxiety. We can measure that. Ask you on a scale of 1 to 10, how scared are you of your midterm exam? 1, I got this. 10, I'm going to crap my pants. Somewhere we can come up with a scale in the middle. Can't sleep's like a 6. Overstudying is like a 7. Exposure to violence. This is again, parenting is hard, right? I actually watch movies and go, how many people will get killed and in what fashion? Because my son John really likes superhero movies, but Batman killed a ton of people in the last movie pretty viciously. So I'm not thinking he's going to watch that one. And you can actually Google, like there's some parenting website out there that'll tell you like curse words and amount of sex and violence in movies. Parenting styles, amount of exercise, right? How much you drink, how many hours of sleep you get a night. I once actually said this out loud, and at first I felt shame, and now I embrace it. I was talking with a colleague about their research project, and they said, I'm having a hard time conceptualizing this variable. And I said, tell me about it. I got a PhD from a Big Ten university. I can measure anything. Because that's what we do, right? We're very quantitative based. And then he looked at me and he's like, oh, you're a jerk. And I'm like, yes, I am, but I will answer your question. And as we talked about it, we found a way to measure that concept. So we think we can measure almost anything, as long as you're not doing remote viewing. Okay, so first step, come up with a statement that you think describes how an outcome is derived. Where do they come from? Well, they can come from belief, they can come from urban legend, they can come from so-called historical fact. It can come from a variety of sources. But my argument to you is that you should get research questions from your discipline. The actual people participating in your discipline. Professors and scholars that are engaged in an epic, years-long conversation over an issue. That's where your research questions should come from. One of my old advisors, when he was helping me figure out what I was going to write in my dissertation, I just asked him, I said, where'd you get your idea from? And he reached up off his bookshelf, he opened up a book, and he pointed to a sentence in a book. And he said, that's where I got my idea from. Like page 283 of this book. And he could just point to it, and he goes, I read this, and I thought they were wrong. So I wanted to prove them wrong. And that was his research question. So finding your question and what's interesting to you should come from reading and studying. That's where it should come from. It should come from your personal life. It should come from whatever it is that you're interested in. That's what you should study. But it should be grounded in the academic conversation. And that's what I go into in the supplemental video, is how I actually do that, how I look for journal articles, how I arrange the literature. But that's what you should be doing. Okay. Whatever research hypothesis you have, you're going to have to identify variables. And again, borrowing from the harder sciences, we should remember that there's an independent variable, which we denote with an X. Don't ask me why, I don't really know. And the independent variable is sort of the cause, or it could be what you can manipulate. One of the things that we discuss in academics is the value of student evaluations. How well do they measure the effectiveness of an instructor? Imagine if I wanted to run an experiment. I think that undergraduates are shallow people who only care about an instructor's physical appearance. And I know this because people have commented on my wardrobe in my student evaluations. You want to know what they write? I wear too many blue shirts. Actual comment. Not a blue shirt today. All right. And we as professors, we use student evaluations to measure teaching effectiveness and literally decide whether to keep somebody or fire them. So we have some interest in whether or not they actually measure what we think they measure. So imagine if my experience has told me that physical appearance is important. I'm going to run an experiment, and I'm going to turn the lights out in half of my classes. And I'm going to see if not being able to see me so well in a well-lit environment, see, now you're definitely staring me down, I see you, whether or not that affects my student teaching evaluation scores. That's going to be the independent variable, the degree of lighting. The dependent variable is the outcome. And now what's the outcome? What's the thing that I'm interested in my teaching evaluation? Yeah, my scores, right? So if you rate me on a 0 to 5 scale, what's my number? Is my number higher on Thursday in the dark than Tuesday in the light? Okay. Dependent variables are y, and we actually have done a lot of research into student evaluations. If I wear a necktie, my scores go up, but only if I wear it, but I only need to wear it for the first couple weeks because it sets that initial impression. If I bring you candy on the day of the evaluation, the scores go up. And then a fascinating one, being a man gives me higher scores than if I were a female professor. You want to be convinced? I see a look. I like the lady. Explain. Sure. So they ran an experiment using an online class. In a true online class, you might not have any interaction with your professor. So how do you know if somebody's male or female? Meh. You're not talking to them. You're not interacting with them. Their name. Run an online course, same school, same class, same exact course. Give one instructor a male name, give the other class a female name, see what happens.
And you just keep everything else the exact same?
Everything else is exactly the same. Male names get higher evaluation scores than female names. Exact same course.
Crazy. There's more female college students than non-male college students.
Again, we can control for all of that, right? That's a variable. We can control for that. We know whether or not the student's male or female. All right. So research questions, when you derive your research question, your hypothesis, you're going to instantly sort of think of the variables that are going to be in it. The next step is collecting data. And the reason we have to mention this is because data needs to be observed. Where people get hung up on is how much data do you need? And we're going to come back to this later in the course, but I want to set up this dichotomy for you. You can either have population data. Now, population data is when you have data on all of the possible subjects or units that can be included in a study. So if I were to give a survey of this class today, would I have population data of my class? No, because not everybody's here. We have a magical day when all 16 people are in the room. I give a survey. Do I then have population data? Yes, because I have all the people in my class. You're in my Tuesday class. You don't get to do the survey. Interloper. All right. A sample is the opposite. A sample is some. It's a subset. It's a smaller grouping of the population used when you can't analyze a whole population. So how are you guys a sample? You're the students that are here. Think bigger. How are you also a sample? You are a sample of coastal students. The 10,500 coastal students, I got a sample of 15 of you. All right. And I can use the data for you to represent the population. Meh, I don't need to do the examples. Next step, select the method. Once you have the data, you have to decide what to do with it. Now, what we're doing with our data is we're trying to describe a causal relationship. Remember, we're not the hard sciences. We're not talking about actual causality, where if you add this ingredient and this ingredient, you get fire. That's not what we're talking about. That's deterministic. We're talking about causal relationships. One of the ways that we test for causality in our what we observe is to try to control as many other outside effects as possible. In science, you might have heard of this term, a control condition, and that's why you have the same class with the same assignments, and right? You want to control all of the other stuff. It's the exact same class, using the exact same Moodle, with the exact same deadlines, with the exact same paper lengths. If you think about this, there are two types of settings in which you can have these experiments or have these conditions. One is which you have complete control over the environment. Another one is where you don't have a lot of control over the environment. So you have to think about the conditions under which are controlled or need to be measured and included in your design. We get to this, right? We get to this when we talk about the methods that we learn. Step 4, analyzing the data. This is known as doing the math. Okay. When we start with math, in chapter 3, we're going to start with descriptive statistics. Descriptive statistics are one that represent our data. We can summarize the data that we have. This is your mean, median, and mode, where you take a large data set and boil it down to a single number. Variance is a descriptive statistic, a standard deviation, a range. What is the range of values? Sometimes students want to know that with a test, right? You take a test, you get your score. What do you want to know? I want to know what the average score is, and I want to know what the range is. What does the highest score tell you? Yeah. What did the smartest person in the room get? What does the lowest score tell you? At least I'm not that son of a bitch. Or, I am that son of a bitch. I need to get out of this class. When's the drop deadline again? All right. So you have measures of central tendency and measures of variance. This is chapters 3 and 4. All right, we're going to this is really simple stuff. This is middle school math. Then, what we're going to do is we're going to get to inferential statistics. And inferential statistics are where we're going to take our sample data and generalize to the population. So we're going to use methods that allow us to describe the whole population, whether it's all coastal students or all people in the world, based upon the samples that we have. And that's like 5 through 12. We're going to spend a lot of time in inferential statistics because that's what social science is built on. 5's easy. 5 is where we're going to draw our conclusion. We're going to take our expectations and our research hypothesis. We're going to compare the outcomes of our data analysis, and then we're going to ask ourselves whether or not the data we have and how we've analyzed it using the methods that we know allow us to determine whether or not we support the research hypothesis. Now, again, where social science is different is in the veracity of our outcomes. There's an important distinction between support and prove. What is it about the word prove?
Proof means that it's definitive.
That it's definitive. All right? Give me another synonym for definitive.
It's the truth.
We're not using truth in here.
It's fact.
Okay. Give me somebody else other than you, because I don't like the words you're using. You keep using my words. Use other words. Prove. Another way of saying prove. There's one word I'm looking for. I'm going to think about it, and you guys are going to read my mind. You got close with definitive. Okay. You didn't say certain, did you? Okay, good, because I didn't think I heard you say certain. Okay? When you say that you've proven something, you've created a certainty. And we don't do that in social science. And the main reason we don't have certainties in social science is because you all are unpredictable. You do stuff that you should not absolutely do, ever. And you know you shouldn't do it. But yet you do it anyways. What's the last thing you did that you knew you shouldn't have done? But you did it anyways. Or your friend did it. Sorry. Anybody got anything? Nobody? Chickens. Chickens.
I broke a vase.
What do you mean you broke a vase? Like you're like, I'm going to break this vase?
Inside the house, and I broke a vase, and he said, my brother did it.
Okay, there you go. You broke a rule, you knew you shouldn't have done it, but you did it anyways. When was the last time somebody in here ran a red light? Today. Yesterday. Why shouldn't you run red lights?
Might cause a wreck.
Because you could cause a wreck. You know you shouldn't run red lights, right? No. You know you shouldn't. You know how I know that's not true? It's because when my light's green and there's still people running through it, they know it's red. They still are going through it. All right? We do things like that all the time. You know you shouldn't do it. You know you shouldn't skip class. You know you shouldn't have ate that 5th slice of pizza. You know you shouldn't have drank that entire bottle of wine. If I would ask you at the beginning, hey, are you going to drink that bottle of wine? You're like, no, I'm not going to do that. That'd be crazy. And then you go and do it. All right? Are you going to drive recklessly on the way home? No, I'm not. Watch this. All right? Human beings are not programmable. You are not predictable or certain or proven in any way. You do things sometimes because you're told not to do things. Hold my beer. Watch this. Don't jump off that roof into the pool. Oh, by the way, are the Shant Life people still showing that video to FYE classes?
Yeah.
Are they? Nice. If you haven't had FYE yet, you'll get to see that. Hey, watch what happens when this kid jumps off the roof of his apartment complex into his pool. Splat. Not splash, splat. That's a bad thing. You do things you know you're not supposed to do, so therefore you are not determined, you are not predictable. We should not, in social science, say what will happen. But we can support things. Our data can support our research hypothesis. Our data cannot prove our research hypothesis. Our data can support our research hypothesis. We can, I also love this term, we can accept it. Now with that term acceptance, there's the sort of unsaid, right? You can accept something but not agree with it. Because agreement is certainty. Acceptance is sort of tolerance. We use language in social science of exception, and when we cannot accept a research hypothesis, then we do not reject it. Because rejection is certainty. If you reject a hypothesis, you say it's wrong. We're not saying it's wrong, we're just saying we don't know if it's right. So that's why we do not reject. Again, because there's no certainty with human behavior. And we also are using samples and inferential statistics, and we might have just gotten a bad batch. We might have just gotten a bad sample. The last step in the scientific method is communicating your findings. And this is really important. Because the academic literature that gets built up, this conversation, well, it needs people to constantly be testing and verifying it with different samples to make sure that what we think we know, we can still support. I study courts, I study judges. And for the longest time, at least the last 30 years or so, we have said that judges make decisions based upon their personal policy preferences, their ideology. So we can label judges as liberal or conservative, and therefore, when they have a case before them, we can say that this person is going to vote this way because they're liberal, and they're going to vote this way because they're conservative. And it's not the only explanation, but for 30 years, it was the explanation in judicial politics. So what we did was we had this little industry of measuring ideology and trying to quantify how conservative or liberal a judge was. In my dissertation, which was about public opinion and whether or not public opinion influenced judges, ideology was not significant. This thing for the last 30 years that we had said judges use to make decisions was not significant in my dissertation. And that in and of itself should be like a, hey, everybody look at this thing. But the reason it wasn't significant was because I had measured something else, public opinion, that it turns out we had been measuring in judges' ideologies itself. So what I had done is I'd actually separated it out. We need to have these continual conversations because we need to really understand what it is that we think is important and whether or not it's still important under multiple designs. So that's why when you do research on a subject, a literature review, you will find tons of articles and books that might look like they're all about the same thing. That's the conversation. That's what we need. we need to keep confirming what we think we know. And that's what you're going to do in your term paper. Right? You're going to find a conversation, and you're going to participate in that conversation using the methods that you learn in this class. Voila. The real scientific method, which if you've been paying attention is, how do you write a term paper? You state your research question, you state your hypothesis, you state your data, you do your analysis, you arrive at a decision, and then you write a conclusion. That's the framework for pretty much any decent research paper. If you want to ask me questions about gay cakes, stay after class. Otherwise, I'll let you out a few minutes early. Have a good weekend.